now of introducing Gemma Dodiska. I probably said that wrong. Sorry, Gemma. Gemma, we did practice this morning and I failed. Gemma is an early career research with an interest in supporting the independence and quality life for people with an intellectual disability and developmental disability. Gemma's current projects relate to autism inclusion at the University of Melbourne, the experience of support and conflict within families of autistic children and young adults, and the individualised support living of people with disabilities. Looking forward to this presentation, Gemma, and I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thanks again, Darlene. Can I just confirm it's just my PowerPoint that you can see?
Yeah, it's certainly not the best. It's quite small,
Okay.
but it's okay. Did you want to just move through it and see if it moves? Oh, there you go. That's better. Yep.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Okay. Great, thank you. So I join you all today from the Kulin Nation, and I would like to pay my respects to the elders, both past and present, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians present also. It's great to be here today to share with you all the design of a project that led to the development of a low impact sensory spaces. So the aim of the presentation today is to promote support that meets the diverse needs of individuals. So neurodiversity specifically was the focus of this project. However, we soon learned that through the application of principles of universal design, project outcomes were useful to other disadvantaged and marginalised groups of people. So I'll now jump to the next slide to provide an overview of the presentation. So today I'm going to present on the factors of the project that facilitated success, presented barriers and opportunities that arose. This, I hope, will provide you with some ideas of how you might approach the planning and implementation of an innovative project. So to do this, I will provide you with an overview and background to the project. I will also then provide examples of how we navigated the complexities of the university system. And I'll also highlight the importance of building alliances and the invaluable contribution of place-based champions. So I'm going to delve into more detail on the following slide. So until recently, life outcomes of autistic adults has been an under-researched area. Many people with autism experience sensory stimuli from the environment more intensely than the general population. In higher education settings, this can present as a big challenge, as it can impact on a person's ability to function and to navigate educational and employment environments. So if you can imagine a student who has sensory sensitivities and they have their first lecture at 9 o'clock in the morning, and then in the afternoon, they have to attend a tutorial where they have to participate in discussions with their peers. So while waiting in between, perhaps they need to study, have some lunch, and also find that they need to engage in social interactions with other students. By the afternoon, it's not hard to imagine that people will be feeling really exhausted and even more sensitive to sensory stimuli. Perhaps it would be easier for the person to make their way back home for some much needed downtime, but then that also may pose a risk that escaping the environment may mean that they decide not to return to the tutorial later that day. Another scenario could be that they push through and they attend the tutorial, but the person is so exhausted that perhaps their engagement in discussions isn't to their potential. So a third scenario would be that the person could make use of a sensory supportive space to undertake some quiet study, self-regulate and recharge, which could then enable them to re-energise and continue on with their day. Each person is an individual, and sensory sensitivity to sight, to touch, taste, smell, sound, or any combination of these are very real factors that can leave a person feeling highly anxious. As Merrin also mentioned in her presentation, not all people choose to disclose their disability. What we know is that people on the autism spectrum have higher rates of dropout, unemployment, and underemployment compared with their peers who are not on the autism spectrum. However, as might be popular conception, it's not actually the autism itself that's the causal factor of these poor outcomes. What we understand is that it's mental health, sensory sensitivity, and the ability to self-regulate that are more important predictor variables that can impact on outcomes. Other factors that are perhaps less often thought of are the impact of temperature and sense of position and movement. I encourage you to think back to this slide when I'm talking about these factors in the development of the rooms, as it's not just the room itself, but the systems that need to be in place to support the use of the rooms. On the next slide, I will discuss examples of how we navigated the complexities of the university system. When an idea to develop low-impact sensory supportive study spaces that promote equitable learning amongst tertiary students arose, Professor of Disability and Inclusion, Keith McVilly, supported the project. An important point that I would like to make here is that the idea originated from an autistic person who was clearly listened to by Professor McVilly and Dr. Susan Haywood. Now, Dr. Susan Haywood completed her PhD at the University of Melbourne under the supervision of Professor McVilly, whereby she examined the experience of women on the autism spectrum in the workplace. I encourage you to look at her work, as Susan's work lies at the heart of this project. The initiation of the project was reliant on supportive organisational culture, and the proposal was accepted and funded by the Student Services Amenities Fund at the University of Melbourne. When Susan was offered a postdoc at another university, I became engaged with the team to coordinate the project. And I must tell you, looking back, it has been a long journey. There are many steps that we had to navigate to make the development of the rooms a reality. And I must say that Professor McVilly's leadership was pivotal to a pivotal factor to its success. I really can't emphasize enough the importance of the work and support of the people who became involved in the project at varying stages. The discussions that were held with all key stakeholders enabled the team to develop a robust project proposal that was presented to and approved by Project Services. Things that we needed to consider included how to make the spaces accessible whilst protecting people's privacy, and this included the naming conventions of the room. Now, by engaging with a project officer, Anne Bin Hao from Spatial Analytics, we could update the MAPS application, which is a University of Melbourne navigation and wayfinding map app. The app has accessibility features that enable a person to enter their starting point, select whether they would like to avoid stairs, and then a destination point, a lot like Google Maps. This application also indicates where the nearest accessible toilet is located and many other features that need to be taken into consideration. So back to the naming conventions. The rooms have a number, not a big name that says sensory space. So when a person who presents at Student Equity and Disability Support, led by Lee Papworth, and is considered to potentially benefit from the use of the rooms, they are given instructions on how to book the rooms using their student ID number, and the departments that are managing the rooms are notified. Now, details pertaining to why the person is using the room are not shared. So the person can then find their way to the rooms using the online application, and they can be shown to the room by university staff. The names of the rooms are shared on the website, but the location is kept discreet. So this is just one of the many examples of the discussion and the need for cooperation and collaboration across different departments are required, not to just develop the rooms, but to ensure that people can access the rooms and use them in a safe manner, and also to promote the sustainability of the use of the rooms going forward. So the people who were pivotal in these discussions: Abby Grave, Nikki Haslinghouse, Andrea Hurt, Joyce Halwenge, and Kate McNamara. We also had input from Dr. Matthew Harrison from the Melbourne Graduate School of Education, and David Staples from Infrastructure Services also played a big role in these discussions. You can see on my slide the facilitators, the barriers, the opportunities and environmental factors that were identified throughout the project, and I have included a discussion about all of these throughout the presentation. We're all pretty proud of how the rooms turned out, and I'll show you some of the photos on the next slide. Okay, so here are some of the photos of the 3 rooms that were developed. Once we had approval, we worked with project services, including John Peacock, Peter Nanskawan, and Arthur Karanicolas, to develop architectural drawings, obtain quotes, and undertake the works. So I'll describe some of the features of the room. If you think back to my 3rd slide that had images of the sensors, this can sort of help support some of the thinking of the considerations that have been made. So firstly, sight. Where possible, access to natural light is made available. Now you can't see that very well in these photos, but if you look at the bottom right image, there are windows with blinds and lights with adjustable settings. So while natural light is important, so too is the ability to adjust the environment to suit individual needs. Does anyone here know someone who has migraines? There are times when complete light blockout is required, where at other times it might need to be a dimmed light. So there are individual differences that are being considered between different people, but also differences in individual needs at different times. So I don't have time to talk about all of the accessible features and the reasons for each, but I will briefly list some. So when we're thinking about sight, thinking about adjustable lighting, natural finishings on the furnishings, the colour scheme. With the sounds, there's acoustic blinds, acoustic wall panels, carpet, double glazed windows. Touch, there is tactile walls, and where possible, there is climate control. For sense of position of movement, there are swivel chairs, navigation and wayfinding, and sit-stand desks. These are also private spaces whereby people can feel safe to use their own personal sensory items if needed. From my personal experience, conversations flow in these spaces. Again, the contribution of team members from the Baillieu Law Libraries and the Melbourne Graduate School of Education to find some rooms that are available to be renovated, to be sensory supportive, has been pivotal. Space is a premium at the University of Melbourne, and not only that, a lot of the buildings, while aesthetically pleasing, were built in a time when universal design was not a consideration. Therefore, another major hurdle that we needed to jump was to ensure that the wider building that housed the rooms adhere to principles of universal design. These are the first sensory supportive study spaces at the university, and since this project, another 2 have been developed. On the next slide, I will talk about the role of place-based champions. So with the exception of Professor Tony Atwood and Dr. Susan Haywood, the people listed here are from different departments at the university. I have already mentioned a few people, so I'm not going to repeat names. However, I feel that it's important to take a moment to acknowledge the contributions that people made to the project. And I'm sorry if I've missed anyone. Very importantly was the contribution that students with lived experience have made to the project. And here I'd also like to highlight the work of Dr. Matt Harrison. Without deep consultation, we would not have been able to launch the project early this year. where, thanks to the work of Julie Anderson, who supported the creation of the Accessible launch event. The launch event occurred 1 week before we were all asked to leave the campus due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So we now have plans, once the full return to campus occurs and people can use the rooms, to undertake formal research and evaluation. So I hope my presentation has given you some ideas and perhaps some inspiration. These projects take time, and through deep consultation with place-based champions and students, we were able to navigate the complexities and challenges of the university system and build alliances. And we now have plans to undertake formal research. I just have one final slide. And I'd like to acknowledge Professor McVilly as the project lead. You have an email contact on the screen. If you have any questions or feedback about this project or my presentation, thank you again.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Gemma. That's a wonderful presentation and a huge food for thought. Currently at the university that I'm hosted by, we're looking at doing a number of new builds, and this is a presentation I'll be sending to all our architects and our transformation team. Has anybody got any questions that they would like to ask Gemma? Please put it into the chat and I will ask away. On an aside note, please pass my love on to Keith McVilly. I worked with Keith probably 20 years ago, or probably even, if I actually be truthful, it's probably 30 years ago. So yeah, many years ago in Hobart in the Disability Services team there in Department of Health and Community Services. So it was great to see that he went onto research and has done some amazing work.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah, so we've got a question here. So has this been done in connection with your university's disability action plan, or will it be added to your DAP?
Yes, the action plan did, if I just go back to the strategy, the disability strategy did support this sort of work. So definitely from a strategic level, we need the systems and the university systems in place to enable such projects to go ahead.
Yeah, brilliant. How many rooms did you end up, or were you able to create? And I know you said a little bit about funding, but was just somebody's asked again about and who funded these?
Sure. So we developed 3 rooms in total. There was one at the Baillieu Library, one at the Law Library, and one at the Melbourne Graduate School of Education. So the Melbourne Graduate School of Education, that's the first room there, obviously. And with the library rooms, one of them, for example, the Law Library, it was a really good space because it's right in the middle of the university. So it was identified that perhaps some people who have chronic fatigue might be able to use those spaces as they're travelling across the university during their day.
That's great. And I love the colour palette. We're being challenged by that at the moment. We've got 1 or 2 rooms that are fiery red that the architects seem to like. So we're having to kind of renegotiate that.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry, Gemma, did you have a final word?
No, that was, yeah, a big consideration. And
Yes.
you also have to think about the undertone. So, you know, a lot of people have seen green, but, you know, there's undertones in there as well. So there's a lot of thought. And, yeah, being able to develop such rooms and recommendations that do feed back into the wider university systems is another step forward that perhaps maybe down the track we won't get to fiery red rooms because it won't be in the plans.
No, that's great. So if anybody's got any other questions for Gemma, are you staying around for a little while?
Yeah, sure.
Yep. So just in the chat, please, yeah, chat to Gemma and ask any questions you have in particular.